I'm Rabbi Josh Franklin. I'm the rabbi at the Jewish Center of the Hamptons, and I live in the village of East Hampton. Right now, we're in the sanctuary at the Jewish Center of the Hamptons. Right as COVID was beginning to sweep around the world, we decided to retrofit our sanctuary with live stream cameras and a whole system that would enable us to be virtual, sensing that we were going to have to be virtual only for a very long period of time. After we reopened in April 2021, we actually keep a hybrid model now. We probably have about an equal split between attendees who are virtual and in person, and that was all sparked from COVID. I guess in February we were still possibly optimistic that this virus would not be a pandemic and it would probably be something that was localized to China or Europe, but quickly in March we found out that that was not the case. From pastoral visits, hospital visits, weddings, funerals, all of those things had to change, some of which were disconcerting to people because they wanted things the way that they were. But during a pandemic or during any crisis of this magnitude, we realized that the lives of our community and the health and safety of our community takes precedence over Jewish ritual. We did a couple things that were a little bit new to us. First is I had to officiate a funeral on Zoom. And that is, I wasn't even at the burial site. Only 2 people were, and the entire family was on Zoom. I was on Zoom. And that was a reality that I never thought I would have to face in my rabbinate. And there are many similar circumstances where weddings were just the bride and the groom and 2 witnesses, and then families joined by Zoom. That was not the expectation when the brides and the grooms who I work with got engaged. Every aspect of Jewish life has changed, from how we even celebrate our high holidays. So for example, Rosh Hashanah this past year, we had to get very creative as to how we were going to gather together as a community. And we had both in-person and virtual gatherings. Some of our major services we had to do exclusively virtually. But for one of our services, on the evening of Rosh Hashanah, we actually had a beach service, which we had never done before. And we actually learned from that experience that it's something that our community really enjoyed and really loves. And pandemic or no pandemic, the beach services for Rosh Hashanah evening is here to stay. So Passover 2020, we did have a virtual experience, but Passover is largely about food. So people had to prep their own food and make their own food, and that was okay, I suppose, but we weren't able to share a meal together. I'll say that when we did Passover in 2021, it was perhaps slightly better. At least our expectations were realigned. But I think for many people within our community, that first Passover was a big low point as we realized that this thing, which we love doing, one of the most celebrated Jewish holidays, just couldn't happen even close to the way that we had wanted it to. I had a few very scary conversations with congregants. One was in April 2020. A congregant called me that she had just gotten COVID and that her husband had just gotten COVID, and they were living in New York City. And I kept on checking in on her day after day, made sure she had my cell phone number, and I received the call that she could barely breathe and that she had to call 911 and that her husband was seizing on the floor of the apartment and she didn't know what to do. And it was a traumatic conversation, a traumatic experience for this family, for this husband and wife. And that was the experience of COVID that many people went through. Utter terror, uncertainty, not knowing how to react, not knowing what to do, not knowing what the right decision was. And thankfully, both of them pulled through. But that conversation and that fear for the lives of our community members, which, by the way, wasn't the only type of conversation that I had, wasn't only that family. It was many families who experienced COVID in our community, but that one will always stay with me. Thank God I never got COVID. nor has any of my family, though I should say we haven't yet. I don't think we're out of this whole thing. I do know people who lost their lives to COVID. I do know many people who were sick and struggling and still have long-term impacts. And I feel blessed to not be one of them. But at the same time, I don't think we're far enough out of the pandemic to be able to say what the major lessons we learned from it are, the areas that we've really grown from it. I think we need a little bit of distance and a little bit of time in order to be able to reassess how things changed majorly. We need that perspective, and we're just not quite there yet. During the pandemic, I had to become a master of technology, which is not something that I was used to. For a long time, I was leading services out of my house, out of my office, and we had to set up microphones and web cameras and all sorts of things in order to make sure that the experience that we were offering our community was a high-level spiritual experience. So yeah, I had to learn some new skills during this pandemic and also rely on old skills. My pastoral training and dealing with congregants who were facing very traumatic issues and trauma in their lives and crisis in their lives had to be elevated and really on point, as so many members of our community were experiencing trauma. I think one of the major things that I learned was that community can exist in very profound and deep ways, even if we're not face-to-face. That is, even if we're a virtual community or we have virtual participants, meaningful spiritual experience and relationship can be developed, and that's something that I always poo-pooed. I always said, get off Facebook, get off these online platforms, because they're not real, they're synthetic. And when we're really forced to live within the virtual paradigm, I learned that actually they might not be the same, but they can still be profound, deep, and spiritual, and that we can have the kind of experiences that make Judaism and Jewish community still worthwhile. Trauma. I think we normally know what it's like to go through individual trauma in our lives, the loss of an individual, the loss of a friend, getting sick, but societal trauma is much more rare in our history, and I think we have seen a societal trauma that has impacted the entire world, and that the kind of changes and growth and devastation aren't just felt on a local or individual basis, but they're impacting the very fabric of the way that humanity lives. So trauma, really ever pervasive trauma.